In the USA and China, a massive amount of money is being printed now, and this will significantly boost Bitcoin. And for the first time in the USA, we have confirmation that quantitative easing is happening again here. We see an 842 billion money bomb that will potentially flow into the market now. Not completely, but at least to some extent. We are now seeing quantitative easing here. In the past, quantitative easing was always the sign for an escalating Bitcoin price. This time it's a bit different, but we'll still take a look at it. Additionally, we have rumors that Fort Knox is being audited now. And now there's a massive scenario that's currently going viral, causing Bitcoin to explode while simultaneously causing gold to absolutely crash. We'll take a look at this scenario, what it's all about, and whether it's realistic. Additionally, we see that Strategy has now introduced a new Bitcoin and AI commercial. And on top of that, Cantor Fitzgerald is making a massive entry into Bitcoin. Howard Lutnick, who is leading the charge and personally holds several million in Bitcoin, now wants to transform Cantor Fitzgerald into an absolute Bitcoin company, and has reported new holdings. Or rather, not at all. It's not Howard Lutnick making the decision here, but rather that Cantor Fitzgerald has massively accumulated new Bitcoin holdings. Howard Lutnick is now part of the Trump administration team. We'll start right away with Cantor Fitzgerald. It's time for some explosive speculations. Cantor Fitzgerald, an established financial institution with a long tradition, held an impressive $1 billion in MicroStrategy in the fourth quarter of 2024, the company's largest investment during this period. This is particularly explosive. Howard Lutnick, the former CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, is now the Secretary of Commerce under Trump and plays a central role in the Sovereign Wealth Fund. A remarkable step, a traditional financial house is positioning itself so strongly in favor of Bitcoin, and that through its participation in MicroStrategy. And I'll say it again, it's quite noticeable that the official Bitcoin strategy hasn't been announced yet. And also, the Sovereign Wealth Fund doesn't officially hold Bitcoin in the US yet, but all the players are filling their pockets on a private level, whether it's the Trump family, Cantor Fitzgerald, or others here. Howard Lutnick personally, or all the other people in the Trump administration team. Everyone is privately lining their pockets here. Now the question is, when will the announcement come that the US is going all in on Bitcoin? And then we'll see something very, very fascinating that will definitely boost the Bitcoin price in the long term. And it's called America, and Chinese money printers are going BRRRR. So they're starting to print money massively now. You can also see it here, how the money supply is increasing, maybe not yet, exploding, but already very strong. It's rising. We see that the Bitcoin price is not following suit yet. And it could just be a matter of time before the Bitcoin price catches up. And now it goes even further. That means in the past bull runs, and so on, we have always seen that the Bitcoin price really escalated when quantitative easing took place, but now we actually have the first reports. That quantitative easing is starting here now. There was a fascinating tweet that makes it clear why quantitative easing, or a quantitative loosening, is already happening here, but through indirect means. Not as usually known through government bond purchases, but it has to do with the debt ceiling. It mentions a liquidity injection of up to $842 billion from the Treasury General Account, TGA. The US government began this week, so a monetary easing, but only temporarily. This is the difference from a normal QE injection. Here is everything that happened, summarized in simple words. According to my understanding, the official reduction of the Treasury General Accounts due to the debt ceiling began on Wednesday, the 12th. Since the US government's debt ceiling of $36 trillion is now binding, the Treasury can no longer take on new debt. The debt ceiling, which is simply reached, is occasionally extended. But now they have basically not been able to extend it anymore, or rather, it's essentially at a standstill right now. They will probably do it soon. But until the debt ceiling is raised, the situation is that money from the TGA, or the Treasury General Account, is flowing into the market. It is also said that this is why they are now forced to use cash from the TGA account to finance government spending. This means that previously, they simply did this by raising the debt ceiling. They issued even more debt. That is no longer possible, so now they have to empty the TGA account. This is very, very important to understand. This leads to a liquidity injection that floods the market with new money and causes bank cracks to increase. So we have the QE effect here. Since the government is forced to use money from the TGA to finance its spending, this injects a liquidity boost into the market. This means that more money is in circulation and bank reserves are increasing. That means Bitcoin to the moon. Not immediately, but over the next few months, we can expect massive money supply expansion. How much it will be in the end, we'll get to that in a moment. Here, this process is now underway. And it will only end when Congress reaches a new debt ceiling agreement, either by raising or suspending the limit. That means, for example, we have always increased it, and Donald Trump once suggested suspending it completely. On Tuesday, the 11th February, the TGA balance was $842 billion. And that means the maximum available liquidity injection is $842 billion. And now the question is whether this entire $842 billion will enter the market. It depends on how quickly a new agreement is reached. The later an agreement is reached, the more money from this TGA account will flow into the economy. Very, very important. Also, in the past, we have always seen that the TGA account was not empty to zero. Liquidity decreased, but we still had the 800 billion. It went down to around 200 billion or so. I reported on this a while ago, but now we have the latest stories that the Treasury General account is being emptied, and now, so to speak, QE is already happening behind the scenes. This means that this Treasury General account might be reduced to about 200 billion or something like that. It will be lowered. And then we have a liquidity injection, not exactly 800 billion, but maybe around 600 billion or so, where one can already assume that this will enter the market. This doesn't all flow into Bitcoin, but into the broader market. However, Bitcoin will also benefit from this because Bitcoin is most correlated with the M2 money supply. That means if the US government now has to spend new funds, they can no longer rely on any debts. So they can't incur more debt, but instead, if I understood correctly, they have to empty the TGA account. Because the debt ceiling has already been reached. And this is about general government expenditures, like when salaries need to be paid or new things are needed or something like that. Just regular government expenses. Here, if I understand correctly, it's not about state refinancing, like if there are any loans that are maturing, because this year a lot of loans are maturing here in the USA. And if refinancing is done here, it clearly won't be paid from the TGA account. But generally, just the normal expenses that a state has from various salaries to things that are needed, purchases and such, all of that is taken from the TGA account. It's important to observe here where we need to keep an eye on how much money actually flows from the TGA account into the market. And it's also important to know that this is essentially new money because the TGA account is usually dormant, not much happens there otherwise. And only when the debt ceiling is reached are they forced to resort to this account. And that was essentially locked up liquidity, which is now being released and flowing into the market. And it's somewhat similar to quantitative easing, except that here government bonds are purchased and the market is flooded with money through these bonds. And now it's happening through the TGA account. However, we must keep in mind that the US Federal Reserve is still engaging in quantitative tightening. And it seems that this is being slightly scaled back. The central banks, including the General Reserve, have already announced that it will be further reduced. But at the same time, we still have quantitative tightening, which is essentially a counteracting effect. That's why we haven't opened all the money floodgates yet. But we see that the money supply is increasing in the US and in China. And now the question is when Bitcoin will follow suit. And then, before we get to the massive scenario, here why Bitcoin could explode extremely, and that this could also cause gold to implode with the Fort Knox story. That means, on one hand, a Bitcoin explosion, a gold implosion. This means we will see major disruptions in gold and massive price increases in Bitcoin. And this scenario is really taking off currently on social media. But before we look at that, just quickly here, the commercial from Strategy, which addresses the new AI and Bitcoin strategy from Strategy.
Strategy, the most powerful word in business. The right strategy makes you agile and responsive to market conditions. Strategy is your competitive advantage, your path to success. In a world where artificial intelligence and digital assets are redefining industries, you need an AI strategy that makes your business smarter and your best people better. You need a treasury strategy that digitizes your capital to make it stronger. And you need a strategic partner who fuels your innovation with their own. Your next big strategy is here.
So you're touching on the fact that you simply need the right strategy. That's certainly the case here as well. Self-promotion for MicroStrategy, or rather, now it's called Strategy, that you simply need the right strategy here. It's just a play on words here. And then they say that digital assets and AI will change everything. And that's also what I always say. Bitcoin in combination with AI is the superpower here that will absolutely change everything. Disrupt things in ways you can hardly imagine. Additionally, it's mentioned here that you also need the right treasury strategy. That means just because you have a good business starting here, it doesn't mean you're successful. You also need a good store of value here. You need a good reserve. And for this reserve strategy, Bitcoin is the right go-to here. And now really take this in here at Fort Knox during the audit that might take place. Things are really escalating here now. It is even being said now that Senator Rand Paul is urging Elon Musk Dodge to check the US gold reserves in Fort Knox to ensure they are still there. So not only are many people now calling on Elon Musk, but even Ron Paul, who also wants to close the central bank here in the USA, the General Reserve. And this is now very, very interesting. Because there is now, I don't know how to say it, a scenario, a forecast of how the whole thing will play out, why this is massively good for Bitcoin, and why this could indeed bring gold into the banks. This was made public by Walker, who also has a Bitcoin podcast here in the USA. I met him once at a Bitcoin conference, a really cool guy. In any case, he went through 9 steps here, detailing how everything will play out with Fort Knox. And this is highly explosive. We also see massive feedback here. It already has almost 1 million impressions, or something like that. So in any case, here are the 9 steps. First step, Elon Musk urges Trump to inspect Fort Knox. That means, as I reported in the last video, Elon Musk is the decisive force pushing Donald Trump forward here. Then secondly, an inspection reveals that less than 500 tons of gold are present. That's also what I said. Possibly, the gold was sold, the gold was already moved out, the gold was never there. There are various theories, but the likelihood that the gold isn't there is quite possible. Because why else would such an audit be delayed for so long? Hasn't there been an audit for 50 years? If everything were really in order, they could audit it at any time. Thirdly, Trump is aware that China and Russia have much more gold than the USA, but very little Bitcoin. That means Donald Trump realizes, then damn, our gold reserves aren't as good as we think. If we want to strengthen the US dollar, then we need a valuable balance sheet. But if we barely have any gold lying around in Fort Knox, then we have a big problem. But now there is also digital gold. And if we want to catch up with the Russians or the Chinese in gold reserves, we probably won't be able to do that. But with Bitcoin, we could achieve that because the Russians and the Chinese haven't been accumulating. And that's why we have a competitive advantage here. That's why this is already the first indication of why this is good for Bitcoin. And then we have the 4th step here. Trump issues an executive order for the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, citing national security. This means the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, once Donald Trump becomes aware of it, after the audit of Fort Knox, won't be introduced slowly through evaluation, but rather a sudden executive order will be issued. Then 5th, the money printer goes BRRR and the USA buys as many Bitcoins as the market can sell. So this means that the quantitative easing I mentioned earlier happens even more, with money being printed. And then with the newly issued money, a massive amount of Bitcoin is purchased. Michael Saylor also says that the first nation to buy Bitcoin with their printed money will win massively. Then 6th, gold crashes in Bitcoin terms. And that's also what you meant, that gold will crash. Of course, it's a question of whether in dollars or in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, it will definitely crash. In dollars, it's still a question of whether it will crash. That means 7th, China and Russia realize that Trump has beaten them to it and try to acquire Bitcoin. This is now very, very exciting. Then we see the nation-state adoption and the nation-state FOMO kicking in here. But this time not only denominated in Bitcoin, but also denominated in dollars. And that's also what many people haven't understood. This could now lead to gold continuing to rising if it turns out that there's no gold in Fort Knox, because then the amount of gold would tend to decrease. And that's true at first. But if we consider the Bitcoin issue here, and that maybe gold no longer holds such relevance, and if the USA starts to accumulate Bitcoin, could be that gold indeed starts to falter. And 9, Peter Schiff is admitted to a psychiatric clinic. Have a nice day, everyone. So we have to honestly say it's a very, very bullish Bitcoin prediction. I also consider all possible positive Bitcoin scenarios here. And I wouldn't say that the probability is 100% that it will happen. We have also seen that Donald Trump tends to focus more on stablecoins and not so much Bitcoin. But Bitcoin could be an important tool here to stabilize the US dollar. And if you want to roll out stablecoins here, you also have to stabilize the US dollar. And if there's simply no gold available, as in Fort Knox, you basically have to rely on Bitcoin. Then you have no other choice but to buy back all the gold here. Or something like that. That would be utopian. You can't manage that. Bitcoin is much easier to acquire here. Bitcoin has much better qualities here. And maybe Donald Trump will end up relying on Bitcoin. Maybe Bitcoin is actually the asset that will save his ass here. Guys, if you're bullish on Bitcoin, I'll put a link below for you. 21 Bitcoin. How you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin with the code BitcoinHotel. There you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoins. This way you can front run the USA, China, Russia, you can front run everyone here. And now I'll show you an ultra bullish jump here from cliff diving in El Salvador.
1, 2, 3.